Hello everybody, my name is Rachel and welcome to my channel Kalanadi. Today I'm going to review the Waning Moon Duology by Leena Likitalo. The first of these, The Five Daughters of the Moon, is already out from Tor.com, and the second, The Sisters of the Crescent Empress, is going to be out very soon in November. This duology is a fantasy retelling of the 1917 Russian Revolution and the fate of the Romanov sisters. In this world, the Crescent Empress is wedded to the moon, who is symbolically the father of her five daughters: Celestia, the eldest, Elise, Sibylla, Meryl, and Alina, the youngest. Now, the Crescent Empress has pushed to expand the boundaries of her empire with constant war, rather than attending to the needs of her subjects, and now, in response, a revolution is brewing. The magic and industry of this world seems to run on animal souls, and the mages are called Gagargi. A particularly powerful and unpleasant Gagargi named Pratislav is trying to convince the Crescent Empress to use his machine of progress, which runs on human souls. This is a price that the Crescent Empress won't pay, so she refuses, and Pratislav then offers his machine to fuel the revolution. So this man is essentially the Rasputin character, charismatic and persuasive, oily and vile. Then the revolution finally happens. The Crescent Empress is toppled, and her five daughters are sent away on a long train journey to a remote house above the Arctic Circle, where they will remain prisoners for months, unsure of their eventual fate. The five daughters are very quickly established with their distinct voices and personalities, and the chapters are told from rotating points of view through all of them. This lets each of the sisters tell what they experience and what they understand is happening. Alina is the youngest and the frailest of the sisters. She can see into the shadow world and see spirits, and she's convinced that the Gagargi Pratislav is going to find her, take her soul, and feed it to his machine. The next oldest is Meryl, who is obsessed with her two dogs, who are her constant companions, and she is my least favorite of the sisters, not because she was a bad character, but just she was that perfect annoying age. The next one up is Sibylla, who's about to turn 16 years old and debut into society. And she at first seems like the expendable middle sister, but she may yet surprise everyone. Then there is Elise, who has been secretly funding the revolution, and out of all of them, she may be the only one who really understands how people have been living in the empire and what has led to this point. And then there is the eldest, Celestia, the Empress-to-be, who I think is the most distant feeling of all the sisters, but she is struggling with her own trauma and trying to come up with a plan in this desperate situation to save her sisters and to become the next Crescent Empress. So firstly, I think that the reality of a revolution is conveyed well here. There are no right answers. You can sympathize with the peasants and their situation, you can sympathize with the sisters and their situation, but no matter what, there is going to be a heavy price to pay, measured in human lives, whether the revolution succeeds or not, whether these sisters regain their power or not. And along with this, I think that Likitalo has really captured what it feels like for these young women of privilege, of frivolity, to slowly come to grips with the tragedy of their situation. They do not wake up the next day with unexpected gravitas and an understanding of the world. They have to slowly transition from the world they knew, the life they knew, having all of their expectations and demands met, to harshness, locked in a train for weeks on end, locked in a house for weeks on end. And I think that Likitalo did that transition very well. So there's also this ongoing question of, can these sisters trust each other? Especially, can the younger sisters trust their older sisters to really have their best interests at heart? And Celestia in particular bears the weight of this question, because she seems to want to protect her sisters as much as possible and not just see them as threats to her gaining the throne, like her mother probably saw her younger sisters. But Celestia also has to choose some very difficult things. For example, if she can only save one of her sisters, which one will she choose? And that is a terrible thing to make anybody decide. As you can probably tell, this is not a happy story. It is not meant to be an easy story. And I applaud Likitalo for not giving into the temptation to give the story, to give these sisters a happier ending necessarily. Perhaps she gives them more hope, but that does not make this a less heartbreaking story. And in fact, I think when you add more of the glimmer of hope and possibility, more chances, it makes the story even more soul-crushing. Overall, I think I would rate this duology at about 3.5 stars. The first part, The Five Daughters of the Moon, is shorter and quicker and establishes the story well, but the second part, The Sisters of the Crescent Empress, is certainly darker, more emotional, and really gives the payoff for all of that buildup. There are really only two things that I think detract from this story. The first one is purely structural, that I don't understand why this was split in half. I think that the break in the middle is rather awkward and presents more of a stumbling block and a pause in the action where there shouldn't be one. There's not really a cliffhanger or anything. And I also think that as one volume, this could have been a little bit more compact, a little bit more concise with some of those redundancies removed. The second item is, not surprisingly, that I think the two youngest sisters had voices that were a little bit too mature for their ages. This, I think, is a pretty common thing to happen when characters are very young in books. But this was especially difficult for me with Leena, who was only 6 years old. And I just found it really hard to believe that a 6-year-old, under any circumstances, would have an internal voice that was so perceptive and articulate. On the other hand, Alina's viewpoint was perhaps the most interesting out of all of the sisters because she can see things that her sisters can't. I have found myself coming back again and again to the ending of this duology and thinking about how it had to be that way, how it was perhaps more hopeful, but also it hurt a lot. And I think what has surprised me the most about this duology is that it seems to have a pretty placid surface, but underneath there's some really dark things happening. And those are my thoughts on the Waning Moon duology by Leena Likitalo. I would definitely recommend this for people who are interested in reading fiction or fantasy inspired by the Russian Revolution and the Romanov sisters. And if you have read this already, or if you want to, please leave me your thoughts down below. Thank you very much for watching, and I will talk to you again soon. Bye.